Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my Week 11 running back starter sits for the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be going over news around the National Football League in terms of fantasy football, then going into the matchups at the running back position as we enter Week 11, then going over my top 36 running back rankings. Before we begin today's episode, let me remind all of you, if you haven't yet already, join the community, click the subscribe button, get that cursor past Stephon Gilmore, cornerback of the New England Patriots. Run a slant route, maybe post corner. Get that cursor to the subscribe button. Click it. Join the community. Also, do not forget to click the bell notification button to stay up to date on my latest content. And if you like today's video, click the like button. All right. Hey, everybody. How's it going? I hope everyone's doing well. All right. So really quickly, in terms of news around the National Football League, Monday night's game was incredible. Just being totally honest, that was a very good back and forth game. I thought the Seahawks could have managed to find a way not to lose that in the second half, but the 49ers still look strong without Kittle, without Emmanuel Sanders. Breida had an injury to his ankle, so a lot of injuries took place in that game for the San Francisco 49ers. So going forward, we're going to really see what this team is made of without their star players, throughout the entire offense. And then, they've obviously lost some defensive players to injury as well, so that's definitely hurting them. But overall, an incredible game. A couple things that we need to mention right off the top. Jacob Hollister. We mentioned him last week on the fantasy waiver wire additions for the tight end position. I'm not sure if any of you went out and picked him up. Like I was mentioning, I said last week, this guy is going to be the starting tight end for this team going forward. We know how much this team loves to use the tight end, going back to Jimmy Graham, Will Disley last season, Will Disley sprinkled in a little bit of this season. And Jacob Hollister really looks like the real deal in this offense with Luke Wilson injured. Will Disley out for the season with his Achilles injury. It looks to me like Hollister has got himself a very good spot and a very good opportunity to continue to produce fantasy points for your rosters, especially for those of you who are really dealing with an inconsistent tight end at the moment. So Jacob Hollister got to pick up. Other than that, Tyler Lockett also went down with injury. A lot of injuries took place last night. Other than that, we saw some great performances from Chris Carson on the ground against a very good defense. DK Metcalf should have had that touchdown, but couldn't hold on to the ball tight enough. Josh Gordon got sprinkled in because of the injury to Tyler Lockett. That's absolutely great. He was producing very well. Didn't see that many snaps. I think he played 28 total snaps for the offense, but overall had some pretty good production. Already seems to be in a groove with Russell Wilson, which is exactly what they need going forward. Picking up their 8th win. I mean, that's insane. They're 8-2. Other than that, the offense looked good. Russell Wilson could have been better. That interception was unfortunate in overtime. No big deal. Could have led to a touchdown, but overall, good performance against one of the better defenses. That's pretty much it in terms of the Monday night game. Outside of that, in terms of what kind of injuries or any sort of news that have come out in the last couple of days. All right, so for the Cleveland Browns, David Njoku could be returning soon from IR. He broke his wrist earlier this season. I think it was in the second or third game this season. And since then, really, we haven't seen too much usage from the tight end position from that team. If we go back and we remember, David Njoku had the second most receptions on the Cleveland Browns just last season, which is extremely vital considering he was one of the security blankets for Baker Mayfield. And his absence has definitely made a pretty big difference on the team, in my opinion. Ricky Seals-Jones, has been able to produce. But Ricky Seals-Jones is no David Njoku, and the return of David Njoku could be imminent. There is a very good opportunity that now that he's feeling healthy and he's rehabbed and he's ready to go, there is a potential in the coming weeks that David Njoku could return. That's another tight end that absolutely could be making his return to the fantasy scene. Outside of that, we're going to, have to wait a couple days in order to see what kind of status Tyler Lockett and Emmanuel Sanders has. At this moment in time, Tyler Lockett is going into the bye week. Like I mentioned yesterday, the bye weeks for this coming week is Seattle Seahawks, the Giants, the Packers, and the Tennessee Titans. So if you have any of those players, they will not be included on today's video, just to give you some a heads up on that. All right, anyway, other than that, I think if in fact Kittle is to miss this week, Dwelley could be Ross Dwelley could be a good option at the tight end position as a waiver wire pickup, but just wasn't able to get too much work. He had a lot of targets in the overtime period, and in the late fourth quarter, but again, wasn't able to produce like a Kittle. So again, Jacob Hollister is probably the best pickup of the group. Outside of that, not too much news. It's still Tuesday, so it's very early. Teams have yet to really practice unless we're talking about the Thursday night game between the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Cleveland Browns, in which we've heard that potentially James Conner should be playing this Thursday in a very good matchup himself. Should be good to go. But other than that, that's all the little news and tidbits I wanted to go over. Let's go ahead and let's talk about the matchups going into week 2 of the fantasy football season, starting off with the number 1 defense that gives up the most points to opposing running backs. It's no surprise that it ended up being the Kansas City Chiefs this week because Derrick Henry ran all over them. 188 rushing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, really just couldn't be stopped. That offensive line for the Tennessee Titans is as good as it gets. They have a couple elite players there, Lewan, Stafford, and they continue to blow over teams. Kansas City Chiefs had gone many weeks without being exposed on the ground. It only took a good running team to come in there and really just, pound the rock, hurt them, and it led to, the Kansas City Chiefs losing the game because of how dominant Derrick Henry was on the ground and how good Ryan Tannehill was down the stretch, getting his team into the end zone, even without Corey Davis and Delaney Walker in the lineup. Very impressive. But again, the Kansas City Chiefs this coming week, they take on Melvin Gordon in this new Los Angeles Chargers offense. That's an extremely exciting venture that probably will lead to Melvin Gordon running the ball 20 plus times like he has each of the last 2 weeks. He's looked pretty good on the ground. Obviously, there's going to be little sprinkles of Eckler, but I still think Melvin Gordon could be a very good play this coming week. Moving on, the Detroit Lions will take on Ezekiel Elliott and the Dallas Cowboys. Zeke really couldn't get anything going this past week. Hasn't got anything going comparatively to last year. At the last stretch of last season, from weeks 9 through 16, Ezekiel Elliott averaged the second most fantasy points amongst all running backs in half PPR, which was 25 points, just behind Christian McCaffrey. Unfortunately, we haven't seen the kind of production and or opportunity to Ezekiel Elliott this season, especially in the passing game. This is a guy that caught the ball 70-some-odd times last year, and we've yet to see anything close to that thus far. So hopefully we get a little bit of a shift here because this team really needs Zeke to step up, and they got to feed him the ball far more than they did on Sunday. Moving on, the Carolina Panthers have been getting gashed up and down the field. This is something that potentially the Atlanta Falcons could take advantage of. I think the Atlanta Falcons, they are not a run-first team. They never really have been, but Brian Hill will probably be the starting running back with Devontae Adams injured at this moment. So that's always a good option for you to pick him up off the waivers and automatically start him into a good high-scoring matchup against the Carolina defense. Moving on, the Cincinnati Bengals will be subject to Josh Jacobs and that Raiders offensive line that will really just be pounding the rock. So that's another easy matchup. Moving on, the Miami Dolphins. Dolphins defense, man, they've looked better in the last 2 weeks, especially against Marlon Mack, who I thought was going to run all over them. This could be some struggles for Frank Gore and Singletary, but I think they'll be fine overall. The Green Bay Packers are going on bye week. The Washington Redskins coming back from a bye week, playing against, if I'm not mistaken, why am I forgetting who the Redskins are playing this week? Well, I guess I got to have to look because I have the Jets, of course. That's why I've completely forgotten, because it's one of these matchups. Well, Le'Veon Bell should have a decent game. Le'Veon looks to be healthy. There was no sign of Ty Montgomery this past week, so everything looks good going forward. Moving on, Los Angeles Chargers playing against the Chiefs. Damien Williams, who is pretty much streamlined as the only RB that is really producing for this team now that LaShawn McCoy is a healthy scratch and missed Sunday's game, could continue to be the same this coming week. Then we move on. The Bills have been struggling against the run. Derrius Guice, Adrian Peterson have that's not who they're playing. Kallen Ballage is a very good opportunity this week, but we know what he's going to do with it. He's going to squander the opportunity. He had 24 touches for 46 yards last week. That's only something that Kallen Ballage would do. Really no other running back is capable of doing such terrible production as such. Moving on, the Chicago Bears will take on Todd Gurley and the Rams. Now, here's the issue. I'll talk about it to more of an extent and why I don't believe Todd Gurley is going to be good this week. But they're going to be missing 2 offensive linemen. Havenstein, the right tackle, and their center. Havenstein's going to miss Sunday's game, but their center is out for the season, done. Season-ending injury, going to the IR, done. So missing 2 offensive linemen with an offense that is already struggling because of how much pressure Goff faces on a weekly basis, and on top of it, how bad their offensive line has been in comparison to last year. It's going to be a struggle for Gurley, and he doesn't see the ball enough. Anyway, moving on, let's talk about some of the tougher matchups. The Houston Texans, the Eagles. I mean, we know some of these front sevens are really significantly better than a lot of other teams. We're not surprised that the 49ers and the Saints and the Buccaneers and the Patriots are really stopping teams in the up front. But I think, I'll talk about the Patriots in a little bit. I think they're a little bit... I think they've been hiding behind the matchups that they've seen in the last couple weeks, and we're going to expose that this week. And I think the Philadelphia Eagles are going to be able to take advantage of that and really put a number in on the New England Patriots. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Otherwise, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my top 36 running back rankings on the week. Starting off with my number one, Christian McCaffrey, a guy that is just unstoppable. It shouldn't be a surprise at this point. This guy's had 3 consecutive 100-yard rushing games, has scored 4 touchdowns in the last 3 weeks. He's unstoppable, whether it's on the ground or through the air. Christian McCaffrey is a start every week. And the fact that he plays against Atlanta's defense, I understand Atlanta's defense looked good last week against Drew Brees and that offense, but that's only going to hold for so long. I expect Christian McCaffrey to have a big week here. He's my number one running back. Moving on to number 2, Dalvin Cook. I mean, it's not a surprise again. These are the top 2 running backs in the National Football League. Christian McCaffrey and Dalvin Cook, both of these guys leading the pack in terms of rushing yards, rushing touchdowns, work in the passing game. These guys are absolutely dominating, and they're not slowing down whatsoever. I think Dalvin Cook, going into the bye week, this is the final week prior to their bye week, they're going to run him hard against this defense for the Denver Broncos, and I think that's where they find their most success, especially when Adam Thielen is out. They want to establish the run, then set up play action. Stephon Diggs was quiet again for a second week in a row, probably will be again, so I think they're going to have to commit to the run again, and Dalvin Cook should be another great play as my number 2 RB on the week. Moving on to number 3, Josh Jacobs. Now, Josh Jacobs was on the thumbnail for a reason, so... I mean, let's just be honest. The Raiders offense, they're rolling. They're picking up wins. They get to play against Cincinnati. And what we saw Cincinnati give up last week in terms of rushing yards is no surprise. The Cincinnati Bengals defensively have been terrible all season long. There is a reason why this team is 0-9. Yes, 0-9. And Lamar Jackson dominated. Gus Edwards was good on the ground. Even though Mark Ingram was only given 9 rushing attempts, it was just mainly because of the game script. They did not require the use of Mark Ingram in order to win that game. So they ran him early. They gave him a rushing touchdown. He surpassed his 10 points in fantasy, and he dipped off. And that's not a big deal. It's exactly kind of what we anticipate with an RB2 like Mark Ingram, and we're safe with that, especially in that matchup. There are weeks that he'll have over 100 yards rushing, but again, I think Josh Jacobs in the Cincinnati matchup is probably going to run all over them. They might pull him early for like the usage of DeAndre Washington or Jalen Richard, but until then, Josh Jacobs probably surpassing 100 yards, probably getting a touchdown, and he's going to have a big week. He's my number 3. Moving on to number 4, Ezekiel Elliott. Like I was mentioning earlier, Ezekiel Elliott this year has not looked, great. In terms of rushing attempts, it's perfectly fine. In the last couple weeks, 28, 22, 23, 20. That's exactly what we want to see. Obviously, the Minnesota matchup was definitely nothing that was a blowover matchup where they could have just dominated up front, but you expect them to. You expect this offensive line that has 3 Pro Bowlers to dominate. When you have Tyron Smith, when you have Travis Frederick, when you have Zach Martin, when you have the blocking tight ends that they do, you expect them to be greater on the ground. 20 rushes for 47 yards, 2 point whatever the hell yards per carry average, that's not good enough for Ezekiel Elliott owners. You're not going to win a fantasy championship if this guy continues to produce such numbers. Yes, the week before had 13.9 fantasy points, didn't have a touchdown. I mean, in the first, 7 weeks of the season, the guy had scored 6 touchdowns on the ground alone. We got to get back to that. Hopefully the Detroit Lions matchup will get us there. But in the coming weeks, there are some better matchups. When you get to play against Detroit, sure, New England in week 12 is not fun, but Buffalo, Chicago, the Rams, those are 3 fun matchups. And in Philly in week 16, which we've seen him run for over 100 yards on them and a touchdown. So Zeke should be getting better, and I think hopefully this week is the week to turn it around. He's my number 4. Moving on to Melvin Gordon at number 5. Like I've mentioned, Melvin Gordon has been really has shifted his season. He went from being, hey, I can touch the ball a couple times a game and get like 6 points, to being Melvin Gordon of last year, the guy that we can rely upon to find the end zone, to dominate on the ground, and that's because of his opportunity. When you increase the opportunity of a talent like Melvin Gordon, regardless of the offensive line, the quarterback play, he is going to find production. And he's done that. In the last 2 weeks, 42 rushing attempts for 188 rushing yards. 3 rushing touchdowns? The dude has been dominating, and I do not see him slowing down this coming Monday night against the Kansas City Chiefs. He's good to go. Obviously, I'd like to see him get more work in the passing game, but again, Eckler's there. They're very confident in Eckler's production and contributions to the team. So as of right now, we'll leave Melvin Gordon at 5, but that's a great play this coming week. Moving on to number 6, Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara has taken a little bit of a dip, and let me tell you why. Alvin Kamara only ran the ball 4 times on Sunday. 4 times. What happened? Like, I understand they were down for majority of the game and they had to pass the ball. Sure, Alvin Kamara had 10 targets, 8 receptions, 50 yards. We've seen him be very productive against the Atlanta Falcons in the past. Last season, when we go back to last season, there was a game in which he caught the ball 15 times against the Atlanta Falcons. So this is not much of a surprise, but I'm thinking to myself, why couldn't this team establish the run? Was it really the offensive line falling apart? Because this Atlanta's defense has not been good. Their players have not changed. There is something wrong. I don't know what exactly it is, but hopefully they can diagnose it and fix it, because Alvin Kamara only touching the ball 12 times in a game is not going to get it done. So hopefully this coming week, playing against Tampa Bay's defense, sure, they are stout up front. They are not going to let you run up the middle. So he's going to have to get more work in the passing game, certainly. But I'm hoping they can address this and run the ball down their throat. We've seen Chris Carson do it. We've seen Derrick Henry do it against this Tampa Bay defense. So hopefully Alvin Kamara can get it done. Otherwise, I'm going to be a little bit concerned going into the future. Moving on, number 7, Le'Veon Bell. Le'Veon Bell, the whole question mark last week, is he going to play? Is he going to play? He played. He wasn't amazing. I'll be honest. Let's just be frank. He wasn't amazing. 18 rushing attempts for 34 rushing yards. That's not good at all. Especially against the New York Giants defense. That's not great. I mean, at any capacity. Luckily for him, he had a rushing touchdown. He got 4 receptions and 34 yards in the passing game. That's where his production will mainly, have its reliability. In a PPR, half PPR format, that's where Le'Veon Bell grants value. As of right now, I think this is a good matchup going in against the Washington Redskins, because I do believe the Washington Redskins defense is very susceptible to just giving up a lot of points. This is not a better team. This is a team that has struggled all season long for a reason, and I don't know if Le'Veon Bell can expose them on the ground, but I know he's going to be good enough in terms of value because of his usage in the passing game, the goal line work, etc. Because outside of him and Jamison Crowder, really there isn't much else on this offense. So as of right now, he'll be my number 7 in a good matchup. Moving on to number 8, James Conner. All right, guys. Here's the thing about James Conner. James Conner is a guy that as of right now, I would love to buy in every single one of my leagues. It is no doubt in my mind, if I go and I look at James Conner's schedule upcoming, it is so juicy that you have to buy James Conner in every league. They get to play against the Cleveland Browns, Cincinnati Bengals, Cleveland Browns once again, Arizona, Buffalo, the Jets, and that is your fantasy playoff schedule. Imagine playing against Arizona, Buffalo, and the Jets in the fantasy playoffs. 3 teams that really aren't good against the run. They really aren't. I mean, the last 6 games here are easy pickings. Playing Cleveland twice, Cincinnati once. I really want a healthy James Conner. If he's not healthy, we're going to have problems. Hopefully he's playing this week, and I really do think he's going to get back on track this offense. This team as a whole, the defense especially, has been elite. They can hopefully get there. I think James Conner, with the offensive line in front of him, with the offense really having to rely upon him in a matchup that should be easy against the Cleveland Browns defense in front 7, I expect him to have a pretty big game. He's my number 8 running back on the week. And going forward, guys, you should probably go out and try to see what you can give up and get for James Conner. Moving on to number 9, Leonard Fournette. All right, so here's the thing about Leonard Fournette. Coming off the bye week, you get Nick Foles back into this offense, which will lead, obviously, to more receptions out of the backfield. He's been fine in the reception game. He's coming off of a bye week, which is perfectly what we want. Leonard Fournette has been healthy all year, and that's exactly what we didn't see in the first 2 seasons of his NFL career and in college. He has stayed healthy. He's found the bye week. He can hopefully parlay that into a rest of season that he's going to stay and maintain his health. This coming week plays against the Indianapolis Colts. Colts didn't look fantastic this past week, especially with Brian Hoyer at quarterback, but I do think Even if Fournette can't get it done on the ground, his opportunities in the passing game have led to a lot of success this year. And either way, he's a top 10 back. Therefore, he sits on my number 9 on the week. Moving on to number 10. Speaking of a top 10 back, Joe Mixon. Here's the thing about Joe Mixon that is so shocking. Joe Mixon, for the entirety of the season, underutilized. The offense was inept. And not a single running back for the Cincinnati Bengals had a rushing touchdown for the entire season. Now, that continues to stay, it stands true. They want to get into the end zone. It's been 10 weeks that not a single running back for the Cincinnati Bengals have scored a touchdown. But they really gave Joe Mixon a huge opportunity this last week to get in the end zone. 30 rushing attempts for 114 rushing yards. Sure, he also got some work in the passing game, 2 receptions, something, 30 some odd yards. That's great, perfectly fine. But the opportunity of touching the ball 32 times is very rare in the National Football League. The coming weeks for Joe Mixon, very easy matchups. Oakland, in my opinion, on the ground should be an easy matchup for Joe Mixon. Following week against Pittsburgh is not fun. But then you play the Jets, the Browns, and then in the final week of the fantasy playoffs, you play against Miami. I'm not counting that New England game in 15 because that's not going to be fun. But if they can continue to feed Joe Mixon the ball, he's the key to this offense. It's something that they very much so didn't utilize this year comparatively to last year. He was the offense last year. This year they showed up. They barely even try to give him the ball. And hopefully after this past week, after the bye week, they'll turn it around. And I think Raiders matchup this week is good for him. All right, moving on to number 11, Nick Chubb. Nick Chubb should be higher, in my opinion. The defense for the Steelers is great. But Kareem Hunt's presence definitely going to take opportunity away from him. Therefore, he'll sit at the number 11 spot. Otherwise, this is one of the guys that in the National Football League right now isn't like a top of the list in terms of rushing yards for his team. Last week, 20 rushing attempts, 100 rushing yards plus. This is a guy that's getting a lot of work on the ground and is hopefully going to continue to see so. But the issue is that, Nick Chubb played against the Buffalo Bills. That defense is not good. When you go and you play against Pittsburgh on Thursday night, you're hoping that the short week is going to hurt the defense. Similar to how it did with the 49ers weeks back when Kenyan Drake ran for over 100. So Chubb will have a very good opportunity if he stays healthy, and they really run the ball heavily against the Steelers this week. So he's my number 11. Moving on to number 12, Damien Williams. All right, so if we go back and we think about Damien Williams last year, when Kareem Hunt was gone, when Spencer Ware had that injury against the Ravens, Damien Williams came in and was able to score so many fantasy points because of the opportunity not only, and the offense as a whole and being able to get into the red zone so damn often because of how good the Kansas City Chiefs are, but because of the fact that he was scoring touchdowns. Now, this past week, sure, he didn't score a touchdown, but he touched the ball 24 times, 5 targets, 5 receptions in the passing game, 19 times on the ground. Sure, he coughed up the ball once that led, to potentially them losing the game. But I still believe if, in fact, LaShawn McCoy is going to be missing time, Damien Williams is an extremely valuable running back, especially 100% because he is associated with the Patrick Mahomes-led offense and because he's going to eventually find the end zone because it's only a matter of time until they get down to the goal line, they plunge him in, and he continues to rack a lot of points. Damien Williams in the coming week should have a lot of value. He's my number 12 on the week. Moving on, let's talk about my RB2, starting off with number 13, Devin Singletary. Singletary pretty much, I wouldn't say disappeared this last week, but he was pretty much underwhelming, especially considering the matchup against the Cleveland Browns, which should have been better. But the issue is because of the fact that they got down to the goal line and Frank Gore stole a rushing touchdown. That's something that we don't want to see and hopefully will continue to change. But I think that is very promising is the fact that Devin Singletary played nearly 65% of the offensive snaps this past week. And I think with that, going forward, should be a good play for this offense. And I think especially this coming week as the Buffalo Bills will take on, against the Miami Dolphins. Again, Miami Dolphins, sure, they've looked better in the last couple weeks, but I still think they are very much so on the fringe of tilting and getting their asses whooped on one of these weeks. I know they've picked up 2 wins, but they're on the fringe there. In terms of Devin Singletary's value, not only will an increase in rushing attempts make a huge difference, or at least some goal line work, but his passing game work, the fact that he is catching so many balls and seeing so many targets, it's not only going to help Josh Allen, but it helps the offense as a whole. So they're going to use him more and more as the weeks go on. There's a reason why they drafted him. There's a reason why they got rid of LaShawn McCoy, because this is the running back of the future. And as the weeks progress, I think Devin Singletary will continue to see more and more work, see more and more of a snap share that will lead to fantasy points in his direction. Moving on to number 14, Jordan Howard. I kind of alluded to this earlier with the New England Patriots not being that good against the run. Now, a lot of people may be thinking, well, the New England Patriots are the best defense in the National Football League on the ground. Well, as of right now, in terms of giving up points to opponents and opposing running backs, that is true. But in the last 2 games, they have been rushed on for over 115 yards by the last 2 running backs. What exactly does that mean? Mark Ingram, on 15 carries, had 115 yards in Week 9. Was that an accident? I don't think so. They plunged the ball, and they just pretty much jammed it down New England's throat. The week prior to that, Nick Chubb had 20 rushes for 130 rushing yards. Is that an accident? I don't think so, because Nick Chubb even had a 40-yard run that would have led to a touchdown at the end of that drive, but he fumbled. Fumbled twice in that game, in fact. Very much so the big difference maker there. And even before that, in Week 7, Le'Veon Bell, 15 rushes, 70 yards. Le'Veon Bell couldn't even run against the Giants last week. I believe there is an issue with the front 7 of the New England Patriots, even in going back to Week 4. Frank Gore ran for 109 yards on this defense. There is an issue. There is always a hole in every defense. I personally believe it is going to be stopping the run for the New England Patriots. I honestly do believe that is the case. Now, if someone can tell me that their best run-stopping nose tackle has been out for the last couple of weeks and they've been running up the A-gap the entire time, and he's coming back, then thank you. I'll change my mind. But at this point in time, the fact that Jordan Howard is getting as many runs as he has gotten in the last couple of weeks, the productivity of this offensive line has definitely shifted from earlier in the season. They're a run-first team. The Philadelphia Eagles are a run-first team. I don't care what you say. They are heavily dependent on Jordan Howard's production. I think that's exactly what they're going to key in on this week, playing against the Patriots. He's my number 14 back, no joke. Playing on, let's talk about number 15, David Montgomery. Another one of these backs that, similar to Singletary, young, rookie running back, getting the job, was underwhelming this past week. Now, the underwhelming nature of his position, I mean, it happens. When you don't score touchdowns at the running back position, it is going to make a difference. Certainly. That 6-point difference is everything. When you get 17 rushing yards on the ground, though, that's promising. That's more rushes than he had the week before. And I think as the weeks progress, they get to play against the LA Rams in LA this week. But I do think there is a very good opportunity for David Montgomery to pick up another big week here. If he finds himself in the red zone, could have himself a couple good games. The rest of the season schedule, I'm telling you, the Giants, Detroit, Dallas, Green Bay, Kansas City, those are easy games, easy rushing attempts for David Montgomery. So hopefully he can turn it around this week against the LA Rams as my number 15 back. Moving on to number 16, Tevin Coleman. All right, so here's the thing about Tevin Coleman. Had a pretty good night to an extent, right? A lot of Tevin Coleman's production through the air. The fact that he doesn't touch the ball enough is unfortunate. I don't understand the play call of, okay, we have Tevin Coleman. Breida goes down with a little bit of an ankle injury. But in overtime, we're only going to use Raheem Mostert to keep our running backs fresh. Put your best running back in. I don't give a shit about fresh. Put in Tevin Coleman. You saw how vital he was to the offense in that late game drive to get down, to kick that field goal. Just continue to feed him the ball. This is a guy that needs more work. 9 rushing attempts for 40 yards. I mean, geez, man, give him the ball 20 times a game. On the ground, through the air, combined. Feed Tevin Coleman the ball. And I think hopefully going into this coming week's matchup, if in fact Breida's going to still be, ankle reserved, whatever he is, Coleman needs more touches and I think he'll get it. This is the least touches he has seen since week 1 where he actually got hurt and left the game. So it's very unfortunate, but hopefully we'll get back on track with Tevin Coleman's touches. All right, moving on. Phillip Lindsay, my number 17. Phillip Lindsay's coming off a bye week, playing against the Minnesota Vikings. Now, you may be thinking, Andrew, really? You're going to play Phillip Lindsay against Minnesota? I don't know, man. It's kind of hard to explain. I think to myself, Phillip Lindsay has this X factor that a lot of other running backs in the National Football League do not have. He really does. He runs hard and he runs with a purpose. And for some reason, it gives me maybe some sort of false confidence into believing that Phillip Lindsay can get something done this week. There are some weeks where he'll completely disappear, and there are some weeks where he'll run for 10 yards per carry and just completely dominate and dictate an entire game. This is one of those weeks where I really do think that if, in fact, the Minnesota Vikings cannot dominate up front, if Dalvin Cook is slow to get going, and if their passing game isn't available to hurry up and make some plays here and there, I think Phillip Lindsay, Royce Freeman, the combination of the two could dominate, and I think Phillip Lindsay is, between the two of them, more likely to have big performances. We'll leave him as number 17. Again, everybody here from here on out, very much so touchdown dependent. Speaking of touchdown dependent, let's move on to my number 18, Mark Ingram. Mark Ingram plays against the Houston Texans. Perfectly fine. Should be a good matchup. He's the starting running back. He'll get the goal line carries. If he doesn't score a touchdown this coming week, it's going to be a struggle. But he gets his attempts. He'll get his yards. He'll be perfectly fine. I think Mark Ingram is another one of these solid RB2s that should be depended upon as such. Don't expect huge performances, but expect him, 10-plus fantasy points in a half PPR scoring format, because that's really what he has done all season long on average. So he should be good to go in said matchup against the Texans. He's my number 18. Moving on to number 19, another one of these guys that relies upon touchdowns, Marlon Mack. Very much so another one of these guys with an underwhelming performance. 19 carries for only 74 yards, no touchdowns against the Miami Dolphins front. Plays against Jacksonville this week. Another one of these matchups that isn't great. Their offensive line did not look to dominate on Sunday against the Miami Dolphins, and if they cannot change that in the coming weeks, Marlon Mack is going to continue to struggle. Again, Marlon Mack this season, only 3 rushing touchdowns. That is not good at all. Even Chris Carson, who has struggled in the red zone, had his 4th rushing touchdown last week, or yesterday. I think Marlon Mack really needs, sure, he's getting as much work on the ground as possible. 18, 19, 21, 19 on the ground in the last 4 weeks. Perfect. But we need rushing attempts. It's a fact that this offense has struggled getting into the red zone with Hoyer, with Brissett. That has kind of hurt Marlon Mack in the last couple of weeks. Moving on. Ronald Jones. Speaking of Peyton Barber, Ronald Jones, my number 20 running back. Ronald Jones didn't look great on the ground. He had his 11 rushing attempts, but his 8 for 8 target 2 receptions for 77 receiving yards, like I mentioned yesterday for the waiver wire, is all the difference. Ronald Jones should have another decent game here. I understand it is a tough matchup against the New Orleans Saints, but Ronald Jones is bound to get a good amount of touches and have a promising week again because of his usage in the passing game, which I think will be heavily utilized in said matchup because it should be a higher scoring event between the two teams. Moving on to number 21, Brian Hill in the same matchup, or not in the same matchup, in the NFC South, Brian Hill will be taking on the Carolina Panthers, filling in for Devontae Freeman, Ito Smith on the IR. Brian Hill has all the confidence from the coaching staff. Dan Quinn has come out and said, we are all good with feeding the ball to Brian Hill. We trust him. He should be good to go rest of season. If, in fact, Devontae Freeman is going to, puts out for a couple weeks. Regardless, moving on, the whole thing is Brian Hill has a very good opportunity against the Carolina Panthers. Again, the Carolina Panthers have not been able to stop the run in 4 weeks. They haven't. They have not, and I don't think they're changing that anytime soon. So as of right now, my number 21 back Brian Hill should be the number 1 waiver wire addition of your week. Moving on, Carlos Hyde at number 22 playing against the Ravens. It's not an easy matchup, but I think Carlos Hyde has looked good in the last couple of weeks. Again, this is another one of these RB2s because of his ability to get a lot of touches, the opportunities there, and maybe sometimes have a big run or potentially get some goal line work to, save his week pretty much. So he sits in my number 22 spot, a safe play there as an RB2. Moving on to number 23, James White. The New England Patriots take on the Philadelphia Eagles. Running against the front seven is like running into a brick wall. I don't want to do it. Therefore, I do not think Sony Michel is going to play well, and I think James White is going to be leaned upon very heavily in this game, and that's why he sits in my number 23 spot in a half PPR, full PPR format. He's extremely valuable, 10-plus point guy every single week, and that's where he pretty much stands here at the number 23 spot. I have a lot of confidence in him going in the week. Also, he had more rushing attempts than Sony Michel last week, or 2 weeks ago, because they were on a bye. So what the heck is that? Moving on to number 24, Kenyan Drake. David Johnson's injured, and I don't want to play David Johnson anymore. Kenyan Drake had a pretty good week against the 49ers. Is he going to be able to do it again? I don't know. I don't think so, but I still reserve a RB2 potential for him, because he did play 65% of the snaps on Sunday for the Cardinals. So he will play more in this coming week. So he should be good to go as my number 24 back, a guy that is extremely versatile in said offense. Moving on to number 25, Matt Breida. His injury, he'll probably play through it. He always does, and he'll probably have a decent week. He'll be an RB3. Matt Breida somehow always will be questionable, and then he'll have a monster game. And that's what he does. And that's why we'll put him at 25, because Matt Breida, you just can never count him out. Never can. Moving on to number 26, Todd Gurley. Todd Gurley, the issue with him, like I mentioned earlier, he's going to be down 2 offensive linemen this Sunday. They play against the Chicago Bears, who they have not, speaking of underwhelming, have not been up to par from where they were last year in terms of a defense, in terms of dominating. But this offense doesn't want to run the ball with Todd Gurley. They gave him the ball like 12 times. He ran for 75 some odd yards, and he looked good. But, again, they don't want to feed him enough, and he's injured, and we know it. So try not to play him unless he's your flex play. Moving on to number 27, Sony Michel. Again, like I was mentioning, running into a brick wall is not fun. Obviously, some teams have been able to take advantage of that brick wall and really dominate against them. If Sony Michel somehow falls in for 2 touchdowns, I wouldn't be surprised. He probably will get more opportunity than a lot of the other running backs underneath him. Therefore, he sits there. Moving on, let's talk about number 28, Kareem Hunt. Kareem Hunt getting a lot of work in the passing game. When you catch the ball 7 times, it's not by accident. It's because they want to feed you the rock. 9 targets. 9 targets in his first week. Odell Beckham couldn't get 9 targets unless he paid for them with that watch that he was wearing until this past week. And now Kareem Hunt automatically just given 10-plus touches, got himself a good amount of yards in a PPR format. Again, another one of these flex plays moving forward on a short week. Moving on to number 29, Derrius Guice. I think he'll be pretty decent this week against the Jets defense, a defense that cannot hold anybody. I think him and Adrian Peterson will probably split snaps here and there, but he should be good to go overall. Moving on, let's talk about Royce Freeman at my number 30 spot. Again, Royce Freeman will always be splitting snaps and touches with Phillip Lindsay. Whether he produces on it is 100% dictated on the goal line work. Who is going to get that goal line touch? They're both pretty much quoted for like 40 some odd plus yards. So whoever scores that touchdown between him and Phillip Lindsay is that 10-plus point guy, which is pretty much a flex play at my number 30 spot. That's why Royce Freeman's here. Moving on to number 31, Miles Sanders, a guy that continues to make plays despite the amount of touches he gets. He can touch the ball 6 times in a game and somehow come out with 18 fantasy points. He is a big play kind of guy, and I think because of how much I expect this Eagles team to run the ball on the Patriots, they're going to have to get the change of pace back in there. Miles Sanders will get implementation in this game plan, and I think he'll be a pretty decent play as my number 31. Moving on to number 32, J.D. McKissic. Really quickly, I want to mention, I messed up with Paul Perkins. Because Paul Perkins has been a Giant his entire career, I honestly thought he was back on the Giants. But he's on the Lions, and I did not hear that. So that's my mistake. But regardless, J.D. McKissic is the Lions back because they're going to pass the ball the whole game against the Dallas Cowboys because they don't run the ball. Moving on. Number 33, Kallen Ballage. Again, you're the starting running back of a team. Given the ball 24 times last week, you're eventually going to have to make a big run here or there. You're always capable of it. For this team trying to win games, you'll eventually get there. And I think the matchup against the Buffalo Bills, they're not very good on the ground or stopping the run. And the Dolphins, great. They're not a great offensive line. They can't run the ball well. But Kallen Ballage, if he gets down, maybe scores a touchdown, could be a 10-point guy. Number 34, somehow, some way, has managed to be Allen Robinson. Now, I'm thinking to myself, what did I do and who did I miss out on that somehow Allen Robinson is on this list? Maybe Allen Robinson is going to have a big week, but I doubt that. It's not like DJ Moore last week where DJ Moore showed up twice and had a monster week. I'm actually going to go figure out who am I missing on this list, because for some damn reason, there's somebody that didn't get included on this list. So probably 34 was intended to be Jaylen Samuels. 35 was intended to be Adrian Peterson. And number 36 intended to be Tariq Cohen. Because I'm looking at my active rankings right now for Patreon, and that's exactly what it was intended to be. So Allen Robinson, woof. Moving on to 35, which should have been 34, Jaylen Samuels. Again, he will get some work in the passing game like he typically does against the Cleveland Browns defense this week on a short week. He didn't look great this past week, but again, A lot of his usage will come from some wildcat formations and or work in the passing game, which will pretty much supplement all of his value. Moving on to number 36, Adrian Peterson. Like I mentioned earlier, Derrius Guice won't be the only one taking shots at that Jets front seven. I expect Adrian Peterson to get some work. There should be a little bit of a rotation as the coming weeks go because, again, Derrius Guice is a guy that really, if he takes the wrong cut, could tear his ACL again because, he's literally the paper man. You just blow on him and he breaks his arm or something. Either way, he's made of glass. Regardless, Adrian Peterson's there. Allen Robinson, we'll just leave Allen Robinson there. That's pretty much it, guys. I've been talking about for about 40 minutes or something. That's good enough. I appreciate you guys spending your time watching my videos. Tomorrow, Wide Receiver Wednesday, we'll talk about that. Other than that, thank you everybody for watching. Patreon link is down in the description for those of you looking to get all your 2019 fantasy football questions answered, private live streams, etc. Questions on the daily. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like today's video. And until next time, I'll see you guys. Peace.